Hey friend, my name is Tobel and welcome to Microsoft Flight Simulator and welcome to Fargo. We've got a cargo mission, an executive transport mission today. We will be bringing some passengers over from the Dakotas all the way down to Nebraska. So today's flight is going to be kind of interesting. We're going to do a few things that are a bit different. Number one, I'm going to go through every single step of the startup procedure for the TBM 930 as I understand it. Some of this could be incorrect, so I do apologize, but I'll try to explain as much as I can. We're also going to be doing some overcast to stormy weather today because I would like to rely and start to learn to rely more on the instrument navigation of the TBM 930. We are also looking at a different livery. There were some liveries available on the Nexus mod website, so you can download these liveries. There should be some videos out there on how to apply these liveries to your plane, but they look really, really awesome. So we are rocking out a different livery. We do have a different tail number. I rented a different TBM 930, but we are pretty much good to go. So here's our flight plan right now. We are going from Fargo, North Dakota, all the way over to Alliance Municipal, and we are going to be using IFR flight plan because we do think that there's going to be some nasty, well, there is some nasty weather on the way. So we do have high altitude airways set. It's honestly a pretty short trip. And actually, this is not where the mission originated. It originated at KFFM, but I didn't have enough fuel for this trip. So I had to use the FBO search. And in case you just have not seen how that works, you can take any airport that you're near, do a query, and find FBOs in the vicinity. And FBOs basically shows you what's available at these different airports. So for example, where we are at, not KFFM, sorry, we're actually here at KFAR. They happen to have jet fuel available, and the turboprop requires jet fuel as opposed to just normal avgas. So that is why we had that slight change in our flight plan. But otherwise, I think we're pretty much good to go here within On-Air Company Manager. Soon, very soon, I do hope to start expanding our company, by the way. So we've done a bunch of flights. I'm kind of working my way back from an East Coast trip. Once we get back to Seattle, though, I do plan to start hiring a couple of folks. We've made a good amount of money. I've made a couple of thousand here. We're up to $330 some odd $1,000. Yeah, no, sorry, $314,000. So soonish, we should be able to afford to buy our own aircraft as opposed to rent, which I think would be kind of fun. But there we go. Let me go ahead and confirm and fly now so we get this part set up. And I'm also going to start the simulator as well, so this gets loaded in. Okay, so everything is ready to be tracked. Let's start the tracking inside of our virtual airlines, and you can see that we are really, did we get parked at an actual large aircraft spot? Nice. Our little tiny aircraft is ready to receive. Lovely. What is to our left just here? That is so crazy. Nice. That looks gorgeous. Don't mind the small monoliths that are growing in the car lot. That's completely normal here in Fargo. How you doing there? All right then. So my friends, as you can see, it's quite overcast. It's going to be a pretty ugly flight today, and we will be relying on the TBM's built-in G3000 navigation suite. So here's the checklist stuff. We're going to talk about going through the checklist to start this aircraft. Now, interestingly, I went over to the TBM website and I pulled up their TBM 930 Pilot's Operating Handbook. So if you ever wanted a little layer of immersion, just try to find this guide and maybe print out a couple of the startup pages. And you also do actually have emergency procedures too. So engine failures, fire and smoke. These are really, really fun if you really just want to get yourself immersed more in the experience. But what I noticed here is TBM must have worked with Microsoft Flight Simulator. So here's the before starting engine checklist, and here's the before starting engine checklist on TBM's manual. They're pretty much the same. The only things that have been filtered out are things that you can't like literally do in the plane, or things that aren't, basically the autopilot couldn't do it. Like for start clearance or ATIS information, that is not in the checklist, but crash lever, the battery or GPU, generator to main, de-icing lights, landing gear lights, there's no audio test. So it's pretty much exactly the same. So feel free to use the in-game checklist. It also gives you a cool little eyeball here to help you figure out where something is. Now, somebody told me a really neat trick, by the way. Control keys here, control numbers, will give you different head positions inside of your aircraft to really help you with some of those areas that might be harder to see. So just a little bit of a tip there. So we'll quickly double check that our passengers are loaded. Yes, our invisible passengers are all loaded up, all 5 of them. We have 5 invisible passengers on our plane. No one is directly in front or near the aircraft, so there is no concern for safety there. or no safety problems, I should say. And all, by the way, the inside inspection stuff, it's pretty much done. Everything is set properly. In fact, you can auto-complete the page, just to double check if you wanted to make sure that everything was set. So before starting the engine, we will go ahead and do a couple things. First things first, we are going to set the crash level lever up, turn the battery to battery, generator to main, de-icing test. This is going to be our little light system down here. Let's going to hide the yoke by clicking on the yoke itself. We're going to click the little test button here, and we're going to click the landing light test as well to verify that all of our lighting information is set. Now, this is not in the pre-flight setup, but I'm also going to go ahead and turn on my taxi lights, landing lights, stuff like that, strobe, nav, just because if we don't have this turned on when we try to start the plane up, my little virtual airline program will fuss at me and we'll get a penalty. So just to double check that. Fuel on board is good. We have 118 gallons of fuel in both tanks. Our trip today is only estimated at 267 miles, so we have plenty of fuel in the tank. Especially once we get higher, we're going to have a much better fuel consumption and performance rate, so that's not really a problem. So before starting engine is all good. Now, there's something I want to talk about real quick before I go into the next step. There's two things that they ask you to monitor, and I wanted to explain these real quick. ITT stands for intra-turbine temperature. So this is the temperature, I guess, inside of the turbine housing. So some of these things say maximum 870 degrees for 20 seconds or 1000 for 5 seconds. What this means is that I believe what this means is that we want to move on to the next stage after we've hit these, and you don't want to delay because you'll overheat the engine. NG, I actually had to go look this up, but NG stands for the gas generator rotation speed. So this is an indication of the power output of the engine. So it says 30% before 30 seconds. I believe what this means is that when we do this procedure, when we actually hit the starter button, we want to make sure that it comes up to power relatively quickly. And in fact, there's a cool little timer button here that we can use to time everything. So let's go ahead and set these items up. We are going to set the ignition to auto, which it already is. Propeller area, we've already verified is clear. Aux pump is going to go over there to auto. Aux boost pump is actually to on as opposed to auto. Fair enough. Starter, we're going to hold for 2 seconds and then off. So hold 2 and then off. Now we actually have to start watching all of the information here. So the NG is starting to spin up. It's at 7%, for example. Once it hits 13%, which is right now, we're going to go ahead and set this to low idle.
Your flight will be monitored until you land and shut down the engines.
That was our little input from our virtual airline thing. I forgot to hit start, but we can go ahead and start it now. We wanted to make sure that we come up to about 30% before 30 seconds. So it immediately, the NG was at 30%, 50% before 1 minute, and we're already at 50%. Oil pressure and temperature look good. They're both in the green. And then the automatic starter, we don't really have an automatic starter, so I don't know what this setting is particularly telling us, but once this gets to about 1000 in temperature, we're going to change the throttle from low idle to flight idle. So we're just going to make sure that the temperature spools up. No issues there. The pressure looks good. We are getting voltage. Actually, somewhere in the checklist is actually voltage information, so I think we should be right where we are, 24 or so volts. Here comes the 950 alarm. I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge the alarm, and it's at 1000. So we're going to go ahead and go over from low idle to flight idle in the neutral position. This is going to bring down the ITT, but it's going to bring up the prop RPM. So I think if you've done everything correctly, it should all start spooling up. And it looks like it does. Awesome. So oil pressure, temperature, that's still fine. Aux boost pump is going to go to auto. The fuel selector is going to go to auto. This changes the fuel tank selector to auto, so we don't have to switch between left and right fuel tank. The AP and trim, we're going to turn this to on. Fuel select shift button. Maybe we have to test this. I think I have to probably be able to see which tank we're looking at in order to test that. So we're looking at probably the right tank there. So if we hit, I don't know, the button, does it change it? Yeah, it did change it over to the left tank. So the auto fuel selector is working. AP trims is turned on. Generator will move over to main. It's already still on main, so we're fine there. And bleed, which is pressurization, we're going to set this to auto. Just there above our hot air flow controls. What kind of temperature do we have? It's 13 degrees Celsius outside. So pretty comfortable. We'll change the temperature to be pretty cozy. change this for the passengers as well. You guys okay back there? Everyone fine? We'll cover our safety briefing here in just a little bit as well. Otherwise, our after engine start is set. The only warnings we have are about stall and pitot. So the couple things I wanted to change, pitot left and pitot right will be turned on. We're also going to enable inertial separator. And from what someone mentioned, by the way, inertial separator, somewhere in that little opening down below the turbine there, the mouth, that's going to seal that off so that debris doesn't get pulled in while we're on the ground. I believe that's what that is. So, before taxi, inertial sep is on. Flight controls, check. We can go ahead and do a quick test of the flight controls. You can see the ailerons moving, the elevators moving, and the rudder moving left and right. Awesome. Flaps are up. And now feather, I don't know if feathering just means to accelerate or just to bring up the throttle. We'll throttle up for a second. Throttle back down. We do have our parking brake. Very important that you have the parking brake on during that time. Parking brake on and throttle up again. I don't know. There's like that feather. You see the feather slider here. And I almost think that there's a button somewhere that I can't see. And I thought I actually watched a video about the TBM 930 throttle. And I thought there was another button here somewhere that had the feather options. And from what I understand, the TBM actually has a nose here that can change the angle of your prop as well, which is kind of cool. And again, this is all layman's understanding. I'm very low on my knowledge of our lovely TBM 30, but so far I love it. Okay, so we're pretty much ready to taxi. So here's all the information about before lining up. Landing lights are on, navigation lights are on, ignition is as required, aux, auto, de-icing as required. Everything else is all good. Cool. So I believe we'll come to this page here in just a little bit. A few things that we want to do before we leave. First, I can stop the timer. I kind of forgot all about that timer. Second, let's verify with our MFD that our flight plan is set. Actually, is not set. There it goes. It pulled the information. Took a minute to get there. So here's the information. We're leaving from KFR, and we're actually going to these high altitude, I don't know if these are VOR positions, but these are basically waypoints that will keep us going in the right direction. Eventually, we'll go all the way down here to KAIA. Once we get closer, maybe if this airport has this information built in, there should be a procedure for approaching this airport. Yes, it is an ILS airport, so we should be able to use ILS approach, and we can kind of have our GPS approach the airport in a way that will pick up the localizer, which is going to give us some information about the glide scope, which is going to help us land. Awesome, awesome stuff. A few other things I want to set early on. We're going to set our cruise. We want to have our target altitude. We are going to be targeting 31,000 feet, of course, because that is the maximum elevation, the maximum altitude of the TBM 930. There's a different way I want to try to climb today as well. This was pointed out in a video that I watched. I don't remember the person's name, unfortunately, but they also have a G3000 guide as well. So if you're curious about the G3000, they have a really good guide on that on YouTube. But 31,000 feet is our selected altitude, and we want to try to set a FLC, which I think is flight cruise speed or something like that. What this is doing is we're actually going to set a target airspeed for our ascent or descent. So this is telling the system that once we hit the, I'm not sure if we actually have to hit V and V or if we have to enable flight director. We'll test this out once we get up there, but it's going to climb and maintain this airspeed. So as opposed to saying that I want to climb at 2,000 feet per minute, and that's the indicator to control our ascent, we're going to say I want to climb at 150 knots instead. So that's just something to keep in mind. We are going to be using our nav information, so we'll switch our active navigation to the FMS system. And this is basically keeping us on the pathway. Yeah, nav is going to be the hold. So at this point, all we should have to do is hit autopilot, and then everything will be good to go. I don't know which one I actually need to do. Is it going to be flight director? Flight director takes off nav or keeps nav? It keeps nav on. I don't remember now. We'll also turn half bank mode on. This will actually turn us at a maximum of 15 degrees, I believe, as opposed to 30. So a little bit of a more comfortable flight for our lovely friends in the back seat. Otherwise, my friends, we can check on weather real quick. Get a really quick information about our radar here. The ceiling looks like it's a bazillion miles up. I'm sure we'll get information if we actually talk to ATIS. So let's go ahead and switch over to ATIS, which is the Automated Weather Information System.
Fargo Airport information, Kilo
Okay, 1,600.
Temperature 1 tree. Dew point 1 tree. Altimeter 29.902. RNAV runway 27 in use. Landing and departing runway 27. All aircraft read back hold short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact you have Kilo.
Okay, so we have all of our information for weather. We should be all set there. We are leaving on runway 27, I believe is what I just heard as well. So landing and departing on runway 27, which is going to be, what is runway 27? It's 270 west. So we're going to probably taxi up, over, across an active runway all the way down there. Actually, we'll have to go, what, over, up, over, like that. It's going to be a long taxi. I'm going to go ahead and get our clearance information from our IFR clearance. This is the information you have to verify at the start of an IFR flight to make sure your flight plan is still good.
Clearance delivery Odin 009er IFR to Kilo Alpha India Alpha ready to copy.
Odin 009er is cleared to Kilo Alpha India Alpha Airport as filed. Takeoff runway 27 climb and maintain 6,000 feet. Departure frequency is 120.4 squawk 6046.
Cool. We'll go ahead and read back all that information. I do have our autopilot set to 31,000 because I expect to eventually get to 31,000 in terms of our direction. But they actually are going to give us more instructions than you normally would get at a normal flight. So they'll tell us travel, 270, ascend to 6,000 feet. Normally, though, it's relatively smooth, so we shouldn't have too many issues there. All right, so we're already on the right frequency. We're going to go ahead and request taxi clearance to runway 27.
Cargo ground Odin 009 with Kilo ready to taxi IFR.
Odin 009er taxi to and hold short of runway 27 using taxiway Bravo cross runway 36 Alpha Delta. Contact tower on 133.8 when ready.
Copy taxi, hold short of runway 27 using taxiway B, cross runway 36 Alpha Delta, Odin 009.
All right, so we have all of our clearance information set. I do believe, my friends, we are ready to taxi. Sorry for the long setup, but I hope that was good information for you all. This will be a relatively short flight, only 200 miles away, but we are going to try to climb up as far as we can, just because that's how we roll in our TBM, okay? We get the best mileage from going sky high. I think we have enough clearance to pass our friend here on the ground without running into them. So I'm going to go ahead and taxi over to our target runway. Of course, a real pilot would have written all this information down on a little notepad in terms of like what the instructions were for taxiing. Why is my parking brake not? There it goes. So parking brake is off. So we're supposed to taxi using taxiway B, cross runway 36 using Alpha Delta. So, God, where's my airport at? It's a little hard sometimes to get your information and kind of figure out which runways are which. So maybe we'll look at that a little bit right here too. Let's zoom in. So obviously we're at a parking ramp that we need to go over this way. So this is probably B. The hard part is I actually don't know where, I don't think you can find information about the taxiway name. Maybe one of these websites might have it. Does this show me runway information? Hey, it actually does. So if you're ever really confused about how to get from point A to point B, I guess pull this information up. So taxiway Bravo, well, that doesn't make any sense. I guess this information maybe isn't all the best. It said using taxiway B, cross runway 36. Is it Alpha Delta, the first part? So from Alpha, I don't see taxiway Delta. Okay, Alpha to Delta to Bravo? I don't think the taxi information is super mega accurate. I also don't see any signs here. So we're just going to wing it. I'm sure there's a proper way to read all that information. Now, when they're telling us here, they're telling us to use taxiway B, cross runway 36. Yeah, this is Alpha. It's all witchcraft, friends. I'm going to go ahead and taxi over to our runway, though, and I'll be back here in just a little bit. Okay, so as we approach our runway, there's one more thing I meant to show you guys. If we hit the MFD down here, there's an option for PFD settings, right, the PFD, other PFD settings, wind, and we have a couple different options for wind here. And I wanted to set a few possible wind tracking options. Crap, I always blow these turns. You think it's going to turn a lot faster than it does. We're fine. No one saw that. No one saw that whatsoever. Hey, I guess we're on taxiway D, so I guess we got there the right way. Maybe. Who knows? No one fussed at me, right? That's all that really matters. So there are 3 wind settings from our PFD. Let me stop real quick. I don't think there's anyone who's coming up behind us. So we've got a minute or two that we can just hang out here. So wind option 1 is actually going to show you the wind forces that are currently against your plane. So there's wind crossing, crosswind here, 4 knots from our right side to our left side. We're eventually going to turn into that. So that will turn into a headwind, which helps us take off. Option 2 just shows you the knot and the general direction of the wind. And this shows you the bearing and all that kind of stuff. So just to give you an idea, there's some extra neat little tools built into the PFD. Let's go ahead and pull up our checklist just to double check nothing else is missing. We do want to turn away from... come back, my screen, come back. In theory, we should have been on taxi lights, but I normally keep landing lights on just to avoid any issues with our plug-in. So that is why we're on that. Parking brake is on. Sure, before line up. Landing lights are on. That's verified. Silence the master caution. Navigation lights are on. Ignition is auto or on. Aux boost pump is going to go over to auto as opposed to being on, which it is. Fuel selector is auto. We know that. De-ice, we don't need that just yet. Inertial SEP is still on. Flaps are going to be set to takeoff. So 1 notch of flaps. Bleed is auto. Altimeter setting 2.9 was our barometer, so that should be fine. Transponder squawk, we are already properly set there, and we've already set our autopilot. In theory, I could set this to 6,000, but I'm going to just manually hold at 6,000 until they give us the next instruction here. So prop to the green, brakes released, torque 100%, rotation speed, which is 90 knots, I believe, for the TBM. Brakes up, flaps up. So that should be relatively normal takeoff stuff. So let's contact tower, request takeoff clearance.
Fargo Tower, Odin 009 at runway 27, ready for takeoff. IFR to Kilo Alpha, India Alpha.
Odin 009er, cleared for takeoff runway 27.
Clear for takeoff, runway 27, Odin 009.
All right, friends, I think we're all set to go. Let me go ahead and disable that. I will turn off inertial SEP. We don't need that, I believe, on takeoff. Verify that no one's about to fly into our faces, and we're going to be off to the races. Always taking those turns wide, I tell you what. Get myself lined up here. And we're good to go. I love the TBM, by the way. I really, really have been enjoying this aircraft. Just the sheer power of it is so impressive because it's able to climb so quickly. 90 knots is going to be our rotate speed. So 90 knots, pull up on the stick. Keep this at about 10 degree or 10 to 15
Airborne time log.
Climb angle of attack here. Gear is up. Flaps are down. I'm going to bring back our engine throttle just a smidge. I think I'm fighting my trim a bit. I don't think my trim was quite set right. There we go. A little bit easier. Trim, by the way, again, it's kind of like autopilot for changing your elevation or your angle of attack. So instead of holding the throttle back, or instead of holding the stick back, I'm actually just trimming myself, and it's going to hold it for me. I'm going to go ahead and acknowledge the handoff.
120.4 Odin 009er.
Okay, so we're good to continue on as planned. So I'm going to take my hand off the stick for just a second and zoom out a wee bit just to make sure I can know where our overall course is. Now, we are supposed to keep the runway heading when we do leave the airport. And I'm going to try to expedite my climb just a bit up to 6,000 feet so we can get the next instruction. At some point, I don't know, are we able to make our turn? I think we are able to make our turn. Yes, continue as planned. So we're going to go ahead and start our left turn over to intercept our GPS navigation. I think my joystick is starting to give up the ghost because when I make small adjustments, there's like a dead zone there right in the center of the joystick. And it tends to make really sharp corrections. More so than I'm not actually jerking the controller or anything like that. It just makes really sharp corrections. So I think at some point, my friends, I'm going to have to invest in a new flight yoke. So as we approach our GPS, line here, our navigation line, you'll start to see this indicator start to move. When that starts to move, I'm going to initiate my right-hand turn in order to try to intercept the navigation line. Climb and maintain 14,000 feet. Sounds good to me. We're going to go ahead and start our right-handed turn to intercept the FMS navigation, and I'm going to chat with our friends here. Took the turn a little bit too early, but that's fine. From here, I can pretty much do my autopilot. We're going to go ahead and, in the middle of a turn, enable the autopilot. It's still set to nav, so it's going to hold that information. It's going to actually pick up the FMS navigation and intercept that course. And I think... There we go. I had to enable FLC. So we're going to start climbing, keeping the 150 as our goal, the goal speed. To change that just a notch or two. And we were told to go to... Hey, quit fighting me. We were told to climb up to 14,000 feet. Probably once we hit 14,000 feet, the game will tell us through the controller to go ahead and continue our climb up higher and higher. One thing on these longer flights that have IFR radio communications, you might be told to bounce back and forth between a bunch of different radio channels quite frequently. There's a built-in autopilot portion or co-pilot portion here, where you can actually hand off all radio communications to your co-pilot. So our invisible co-pilot, who I guess actually happens to be our 5th person, because we only have 4 seats. We'll say we actually have a co-pilot, and our 5th person is actually stuck in the back of the plane somewhere, laying down. But yeah, our co-pilot can handle all of the radio communications. Hey, if you have to step away and use the restroom, you can also probably just enable the control aircraft portion as well if you're feeling brave. I normally just leave the autopilot on and, you know, do whatever needs to be done. But once we pass through 10,000 feet, by the way, something I've been really trying to keep in mind lately, because I always get fussed at, is we're supposed to turn off landing lights above 10,000 feet. So you got about 2,000 feet of leeway to turn off your landing lights once you're above 10,000 feet. Otherwise, a couple things here. Wind is crosswind and a little bit of a headwind. This shouldn't impede our flight too much. We're 218 miles away, so it's not going to be a super long cruise. We're going to pretty much hit our target altitude and then probably just come straight down. Otherwise, friends, I think we look pretty good. Our flaps are up. Oil pressure looks good. Everything else is in the green. By the way, if you have a really steep climb up to 31,000 feet or something like that, you might get an alarm about cabin pressure. Generally, that's okay. The cabin should equalize and bleed out over time, so that's not going to break the bank. Just keep that in mind. If you do get a red flashing warning symbol about cabin pressure, you should be okay. Here comes 10,000 feet, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off our lights for the first time ever because I never remember to do that. And you just heard the radio call. This is our co-pilot taking care of the radio calls.
Center Odin 009er is at 10,200 feet, climbing 14,000 feet.
Odin 009er Minneapolis Center, continue as planned. Altimeter 29er decimal 9er 2.
Now here's where the fun part's going to come in. I'm going to change the weather a bit. We're going to change the weather from overcast to storm. Prepare yourselves. We're going to jerk all over the place here for a second. Simulator's going to freak out for a second. Once the game kind of unhex itself, we should be able to come back and reconnect to our flight. So in flight, verify that we're not about to drop the aircraft out of the sky. We should be fine.
Your flight
Start tracking the flight, and we're fine. So, a couple things you might notice right away. What is this on the windows? This is actually ice. We are in a situation where it is starting to get really, really cold outside. In fact, if we do third-person camera, you will start seeing ice building up on the wings. If you ever have trouble seeing that, you actually turn on the ice light, I believe, which helps you kind of get a view of your prop. But at the moment, we're going to flip all of the de-icing stuff on. So airframe de-ice will try to get this ice off the front of the wing. Really, more importantly, on our control surfaces. We don't want our elevators or our ailerons to be frozen over. Also, the prop de-ice will make sure the prop doesn't get iced up, and our windshield is working hard. Now, I don't know what the green actually indicates. I think this means it's turned on. So I believe right now this is actually active. Holy crap, look at that headwind. We have is it a 40 knot wind right now to the northwest? Or to the, I guess, against us here like this. Let's go to PFD settings. Other PFD settings. Wind option 2. Yeah, 30 knots of crosswind here. So yeah, it's not pretty, friends. This is where you really have to start trusting your instruments. Even in third person mode, it starts to feel even worse sometimes because you might think that you're at an angle, if you're at like a weird camera angle or something. Just look at your instruments, trust your instruments, trust everything that's in front of you here. We're still climbing, we're nice and level. All is well in the world. So I'm going to go ahead and continue my climb up to 31,000 feet. There we go. We just got our instruction to climb to flight level 260. So I'll continue doing that. And what I want to do is I'm going to come back once we start our descent and our approach into KFAR. Sorry, into KAIA, as it were. Real quick, I want to come back because I want to show you why I love the storm mode so very much. Look at these views that can crop up. We just came through a storm front cloud. And look at that. It's like being in the eye of a hurricane almost. And the clouds, you know what? It's kind of weird. The clouds really look weird to me. And I've never been able to quite get the same cloud effect that I've seen on other people's videos. So I'm not sure if it's a setting. Our settings are set to ultra. So I'm not entirely sure how the weather is kind of generating the clouds. But you can kind of see they've almost got some textures to them. And they don't really look like clouds so much as like ice cream or something that's frozen off in the distance. But either way, these are some beautiful angles here. Absolutely beautiful. Nature, you scurry. I don't know about you, but I have an overwhelming urge to fly through this arch of cloud. It's crazy up here. Look at this. If you guys haven't flown with the storm setting turned on, I highly encourage it. It creates some of the most insane cloud patterns and storms I've ever seen. And I don't know. I've never seen what happens above the clouds of 2,000 feet during a storm. So maybe this is really how it is, but it is impressive and kind of terrifying. At the end of the day, quick check on everything. We are still doing fine. There is some ice built up on the fuselage as well as the cowling of our turbine up front as well as on the wings tier. But the control surfaces are fine. There's been no problems with performance, and yeah, we're still rocking out. We're only getting, let's see, we're at 55 gallons per hour, and we are going 216 knots over ground. So we are really slowed down right now because of the wind. Normally we'd be going quite a bit faster, but that's okay, my friends. We're going to get there. We have plenty of extra fuel. How's our co-pilot and passengers? Boy, the passengers are probably terrified. I would close all of the windows and just cower the entire flight. I could lock myself down. I'd probably need to be knocked out to be completely calm on this one. As we start to approach our target airport, I wanted to look under the approach information here, procedure information. So, for example, we do have the ILS option available for runway 30, which is what I probably want to do. And looking at that airport inside of On Air Company Manager indicates that there's only one ILS runway. I was also experimenting a little bit with SkyVector. SkyVector is a really cool website that gives you tons of information of your target airport. Now, I'm not really up to speed on all of the different symbols here. This is our airport. This is KAIA. As you can see, there are 3 runways here. It is a north-south runway, an east-west runway, and a northwest-southeast type of runway. So we're going to be going to runway 30 which is going to be the northwest runway. So ideally, we'd want to approach in to the southeast. This is also cool. I think 111.8 channel 5 is the VOR DME. Now, VOR DME, this is navigation information. I am nowhere near, I'm nowhere near skilled enough or experienced enough to really talk about that with any authority. By the way, real quick, I want to request a cruising altitude increase of just 1,000 feet. So I'm going to go ahead and level out at flight level 310. They told us to go to flight level 30, and we want 310. Whenever it says flight level, by the way, the number is the thousands, right? So flight level 310 is 31,000, right? 31,000, just to give you an idea of what that means. Okay, so we are at our appropriate speed, which means we should start speeding up here soon, which is going to make the rest of the trip pretty quick. Did I need to go up all the way this high? Probably not, but I really enjoyed climbing all the way up here in the TBM. It's just such a great view. It's such a workhorse anyways that you tend to get up here really, really fast. So when we're looking at these different approaches, normally they've got, like, if I look at the ILS 30, we have this Dempty. Transition of Dempty. So somewhere in here, in theory, there should be some kind of a symbol, I thought, that says Dempty. But again, the problem with not really knowing all of these symbols on the map and all these different websites is I'm not super familiar with that. So this would be like this, JDOB. JDOB, for example, is a waypoint leaving out of this airport here. Or maybe this is a VOR DME setting. I don't really know. All of you pro pilots, you can help me out with this stuff. Land navigation is not my forte. But yeah, what this is going to do, this transition is telling you where you're going to enter this pattern. So wherever Dempty is where we're going to wind up coming into. So it might be over here and then we loop underneath. It might be to the side and we approach like this. No big deal at the end of the day. We can go ahead and actually load this right now. And I don't remember if it loads, if it changes your active navigation or not. So we're going to Vivid. So Vivid, Gutty, Keef. And then the approach to ILS 30. Interesting. So I wonder once we hit, let me try this up again. Oh, I think once we activate the approach, it's going to put these approach navigation waypoints wherever we happen to be. So I guess if we're at Keef here, once we're at Keef, we probably want to activate the approach sequence. That would make sense to me. But anyways, we'll experiment with that a little bit more. I'm going to let the plane fly, and I'll be back here in just a little bit. So we've just hit our first navigation waypoint. Now here's something I'm kind of curious about. The navigation has an altitude along with it. And I've always been curious of how to enable that portion of your flight. Like, for example, I can see that it says 29,000. And I kind of figured if you're locked into a certain setting, it's going to change your altitude for you. I don't think approach is going to do it. I think you actually hit approach once you're actually on approach to your target runway. I do have the flight director chosen. If I turn altitude off, does that make a difference? Not really. VNV, I believe, is a setting that allows your vertical, the autopilot to change your altitude, basically. And I also think for any kind of a change in elevation or altitude, you normally need to have the flight director on as well, but it all seems to be at the right spot. But we're not changing altitude. So I don't know. I've just been curious about the fact that, does this mean we're actually going to go down to 29,000? Maybe once we pass this waypoint, does that when it actually hits to 29,000? I have no idea. We'll fly through it, and then we'll just see what happens with the autopilot. All right, friends, so I just went through the Gutty waypoint here, and no change in elevation. So nothing changed. We're still at 30,000. I manually just set the altitude to 14,300, just because that was what the autopilot was recommending. And I really just wanted to see if there is a way to have a fully automated descent profile. I know you can get the automated descent as you're approaching the runway if you intercept the localizer. Yes, I'm actually just curious about, can you do that using the FMS or the GPS system? Can you actually set your elevation through that? And as far as I know, we've got everything set. We've got the flight director. I don't know. I've tried to press all the different buttons I know. And the flight director is not automatically having us move down. The flight director, I believe, is the purple thing. That's the purple thing that can control your elevation. So You know what? Your guess, my friend, is as good as mine. But I'm going to go ahead and start descending soon-ish. I'm going to see if the controller here starts to give us a descent order. We are 75 miles away from our next waypoint, or 66 miles, and then it's 52 miles to the airport itself. So we should be able to have plenty of time to descend, but if we're not given a descent order here soon, I'm going to start to do it on my own and just request an altitude decrease. Aha, we were given a descent order. There we go. We'll acknowledge that instruction, and I will adjust my descent target, my altitude target, to 26,000 feet, and we'll go ahead and start descending from there. So as we start to descend to our target altitude, I'm going to go ahead and throttle back a notch. We don't want to descend over 250, or sorry, speed up over 250 knots. I believe that is, I know that's for sure when you're under 10,000 feet, that's some kind of a speed limit. Maybe when you're above 10,000 feet, there's a speed limit too. I have no idea, but we will throttle back whenever we go into a descent. Let's also really quickly see if we can't grab the ILS frequency for our airport here, KAIA. So if we go to waypoint information, type in airport, select airport KA, if I could actually hit the buttons right, IA, enter. This gives us public information. We can actually go to the frequency section and go to ILS for runway 30. So runway 30 ILS is going to be on 108.35. So if we go over here to Navcom, click on audio and radio, 108, I believe, right? 108.35. We can also transfer that information, so that's now the active nav radio, 108.35. And can I go back really quick just to double check that I got that information right? 108.35. So 108.35, 108.35 is set. So once we get in range, we're actually going to see some information populate here in the nav1 heading bug. By the way, if you don't have this set, this side information on either side of your compass, over here on the PFD settings is the bearing information. So I've got my GPS to one side and my nav data to another. So at some point we're going to pick up the localizer signal, and once we're kind of on our final approach, we're going to switch over to using the approach hold, which is this right here, approach mode on. Now that for sure, I've watched that take me all the way in for a landing. So we'll experiment here and there to see which setting is best, basically. Okay, so we're starting to approach Keith here. This is the next and last waypoint. I'm curious if once we go through this. Hey, 10,000 sounds good. I'll change that altitude. Okay, we've just hit our waypoint. Does it load up our approach? It does load up our approach. Awesome. So our approach information has already been loaded. We've hit the final waypoint, and now we're going directly to, as you can see, kind of to the southeast of the airport. So there we go. 51 miles northeast, descend to 5,600, expect ILS runway something something. Sounds good. I think it was 5,600 was our target. So 5,600 feet. I will go ahead and give that autopilot setting.
Descend and maintain 5,600 feet. Expect ILS runway 30 approach via Dempty transition. Cleared to Dempty Odin 009er.
All right, so this airport is unmanned. So our co-pilot just announced that we are on final. We're 42 miles to the... We're in a really long final. We're on a 42-mile final here, but the autopilot automatically added all that information in. Our final command from the flight controllers was to descend down to 5,600 feet, which is lovely. That, in fact, is the setting in our GPS. So we'll try to follow these settings until we pick up the nav hold information, and then from there, we should be able to have the autopilot follow the localizer on in. Once we have visual with the runway, that's when we're going to take the autopilot off and try to land the plane ourselves. If we can't see the runway, we may just let the localizer part bring us right on in. We'll let the autopilot pretty much take up everything until the last little bit before touchdown. Okay, so as you can see, it's beautiful outside, and we are just about ready to make our final turn. Now, here's the thing. We already have our nav information in. Like, it's in the system. It looks like it's actually all picked up by the system. So we could switch over to the localizer, and what's going to happen is our plane should start turning in to intercept the localizer. I kind of want to keep it on FMS. What if we hit nav here? What if we hit the approach button? What does the approach actually do? Let's ride this in on the approach. Let me turn off my... Oh, I never did actually turn on bank half mode, apparently. So our aircraft is currently turning to intercept the waypoint. And actually, you can see the purple dip down a bit. That's the flight director trying to keep us on the glide scope. So in fact, that is working properly. So the settings that I have to make all this work, VNV is enabled. Autopilot, of course, is on. Flight director is on. And we're on the approach right now. So the approach is actually having us go right on the numbers. This diamond is actually our current altitude. And we're right on the glide scope. Again, you want to be right in the middle here. This is your flight system basically already lining you up vertically with the runway. So the GPS is going to handle the left, right. We could also, I believe, switch over to localizer 1 here, and everything would still be tracked properly. Like the flight director would still work, everything else would still work. I think you want to be on the localizer on your final part of your approach, because that gets you a more accurate representation of where you should be landing on the runway, I think. I'm not really 100% sure. We have a 28 knot headwind. There is the runway in sight. As you can see, we've got 2 red lights, 2 white lights, which indicates that we are all lined up and good to go. Yay, everything is hunky-dory. Let's go ahead and drop down a notch of flaps here. Verify a couple of things real quick up top. So we have auto select, that's fine. Landing lights are on, that's all good. Let's go ahead and, how far are we out? We're about 2 miles out. So we'll wait a little bit longer and then we'll go ahead and drop gear. And then normally what you want to do is once you're on your final approach, you do want to try to drop your gear and set your flaps so that you can kind of trim yourself in your power to maintain your descent profile. So for example, we're a little bit high, which makes me think that we're a little bit too high in power. Anything else? I feel like I'm missing something. I don't think so. Let's go ahead and set our full landing and drop the gear. Again, flight director is trying to take us directly to the runway. I could take this over manually right now. Look how we came into this nice open area. That's crazy. Nice, beautiful open cloud just for us to land here at Alliance Municipal. Thanks, God. You're awesome. Way to go, bro. By the way, did I ever get the ATIS information here? I don't think I did, so I'm not entirely sure if I've got my barometer set correctly. We'll hope that our autopilot, co-pilot person helped us out there. I think the stall speed on the TBM is something like 70 knots. So I'm going to go ahead and try to keep it around 100 as we approach. Look at this. I'm not even touching the joystick at all here. It's beautiful. Also, did I change the sim rate properly? I think I might be 1 notch too slow. That feels more appropriate, I think, for the speed. Also, this crosswind. Look at that. Our aircraft is actually pointed this far to the left in order to combat that crosswind that's pushing us away from the runway. So I'm going to go ahead and take off auto control, move my position, oops, smack the microphone. But this is the fun part. I'm not entirely sure if I'm really that good about navigating with wind. So I'm trying to watch the glide scope. I'm going to let the wind push me over to the runway. That's fine. It's doing as intended. I'm actually not even looking at the runway at this point. I guess I could. But I'm actually more looking at the terrain navigation stuff down below. I'm going to go ahead and cut the power. We're still kind of holding left rudder a bit, so the wind doesn't blow us off the runway. Wow, that was really steep descent there at the last little bit. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a bit.
Landing time
try to even out.
Landed
Tug a wheel and we're fine.
India
Look, it
Alpha.
wasn't beautiful, but actually that wasn't all that terrible for a, what was that, a 20 some odd, a 20 knot crosswind or headwind? I'm okay with that. So this looks like a good flight, friends. I'm going to go ahead and pull off the runway here in just a minute. And this was our passenger delivery. Next time on Odin Airlines, we'll probably work on moving back all the way to Seattle. I want to talk about a couple more features of On-Air Company Manager. So I want to start talking about how to manage your company, how to hire other pilots. It's going to be probably more of an on-air focused episode, but I do want to do a couple more flights around our home airport. By the way, I've changed our home airport. I did actually order an FBO, which is, I think when you buy an FBO or you set up an FBO, it gives you a 70% discount on any fees that you might pay for landing at a certain airport. So something to keep in mind. I wanted to start the process. I picked a nice airport that's just northwest of Seattle on one of the islands there of the San Juan Islands. So we'll see how that works down the road. But we do want to do a couple of hops over there. I also discovered something called manual cache, which is where you can kind of set or save high quality imagery of a certain area that would always be loaded when you're flying nearby. So we're going to experiment with that a bit, see if we can get some really high quality imagery of Seattle, and that way we don't have that same problem before of where you know, we had graphics loading it at a really weird spot. So thanks friends so much for being here with me on this very stormy flight. We've arrived safely. Our passengers, our invisible passengers, are very relieved to be on the ground. I'm going to go ahead and taxi over to parking, and we are going to be we're going to be good to go for the rest of today. Thanks friends so much for joining me. As always, I look forward to seeing you again in another video. Good God, look at that storm. Until next time, friends, fly safe, and I'll see you then.